And so now we move on to chapter 8, which is talking about the apologists who emphasize facts. And our authors start out by saying, in the modern period, American evangelical apologetics has been dominated by the evidentialist approach. Its emphasis is on the presentation of Christianity as factual, as supportable or verifiable by the examination of the evidence. Just give me the evidence. Prove to me that there is a God. Let me take a DNA sample of his hair. Let him rearrange the stars to spell his name. And then, only then, will I bow down before him. Well, except maybe not, because it could be all an illusion. And how do I know this is God's hair? And, maybe Jesus never really existed, because I watched this movie about Zeitgeist, and it says that it's really Horus that was brought over, and Christian or Jewish people started to believe in this rising and falling God. So the evidentialist apologists want to present the evidence that actually what we know of historic Christianity falls right in line with orthodoxy. And we're able to know the truth that God exists and Jesus Christ is as the fulfillment of that expression.
Yeah, and when they talk about the modern period, they're not talking about the contemporary period, right? Like the 20th, 21st century or whatever. They're talking about the time after the medieval times, during the I would say 16th, 17th century, 18th century, that kind of stuff, into the 19th century. So that's what they're looking at with regard to the modern period. And that's when this particular approach dominated, because, as we will see, science was coming into its own, and this approach now is going to align itself with science.
Right. So rather than defending the faith in two stages, as the classical apologist does, first by defining theism, then by defending specifically Christian claims, evidentialists use multiple lines of evidence to support Christian theism as a whole. And this isn't only the historical belief of Jesus existing, of him being arrested, dying on the cross, and being raised from the dead. Although an important point, this informs many different avenues of Christianity from an evidentialist point of view. So in this chapter, we'll examine the roots of evidentialist apologetics and consider briefly the thoughts of 5 modern evangelists.
Yeah, good. So the historical roots of evidentialist here. Evidentialist apologetics, they tell us, may from one perspective be viewed as a subtype of classical apologetics. And as you just described, this two-step approach by the classical apologist, the evidentialist, they're going to tell us just uses the second step, basically, right, to give evidences and proof for Christianity. So both approaches, both the classical approach and the evidentialist approach, want to provide reasons for faith that are accessible to non-Christians. So that's the basic idea here. However, the evidentialist approach has, over the past 2 centuries, our authors mentioned, gradually emerged as a significantly different model of apologetics.
Yeah. So, they may want to be included, and evidence from the evidentialists might be used by the classicalists, but they are a separate entity. And so, what caused them to be this separate entity? Why are they an offshoot? Why are they a new arisement? Why didn't just the classical model continue on? Well, the big thing is that they were defending against deism. So the impetus of the development of evidentialist apologetics was the rise of deism. By the early 18th century, modern science seemed to be explaining more and more about the natural world, requiring God as an explanation for things less and less. The enormous success of science encouraged many people to believe that eventually everything could be explained naturalistically. And so this is the God of the gaps idea. So, why was there lightning? Well, because God was angry and he was throwing down lightning bolts as a form of judgment. No, we have actually explained it with ions in the atmosphere, and actually they go up and down and up. And so we've taken God out of that explanation, and then further and further. And so soon we won't need a God because all things can be explained naturalistically. So thus eliminating the need to appeal to the existence of a supernatural creator to explain reality as we know it. Deism was then, in effect, a way station on the road to atheism. The deist allowed that God had created the world and initiated the process governing it, but denied that God was involved in the subsequent history of the creation of humanity. And so, obviously, if you're getting into a conversation about the role of Christianity in the early development of America, usually the retort is, well, all these guys were deists. Well, it's not exactly true. Some were deists, of course, but this blind watchmaker who winds up the watch of the universe, sets aside and walks off stage left, and never picks it back up again, is what the evidentialists are going to be responding to in history here.
Right. So the idea here is that, as deism says, God kind of created everything, and as you mentioned, walked away. And now that allows you to believe in a God, but also hold to all these new scientific discoveries that were going on. Well, look, he just kind of winded it up, as you mentioned, and now all of these things are just working themselves out, right? And so to combat deism, apologists began constructing arguments defending the supernaturalism of biblical Christianity that were modeled after the sciences. So the idea essentially was to fight fire with fire, right? So this is the way science did it. This is the way science argued, and therefore we're going to use that as our methodology of arguing also.